Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Um, I'll be going over today user management. And if someone can confirm that you could see the slides all right as well. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Spigot Office Hours. This is a fairly new series that we're doing this summer, and today we'll be discussing user management. Here's the agenda for today. First, we'll be going over access settings. Next, we'll be going over adding and managing users. After that, managing roles, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. If at any time you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. I'll also be monitoring the Q&A section as well. So feel free to ask any questions and we'll answer those. We'll also go through one of our training sites as well to walk through managing the access settings. So an overview. What we're going to be doing today is showing how we can grant users access to challenges and communities. Challenge access can be provided to enabled users of an instance when we're running a challenge. Admins are the ones that are able to specify which users have access to a challenge. You'll see here on the screenshot, this challenge access column on the users page indicates whether or not a user has access to a particular challenge or community. So here are the 4 different access setting options. We'll be walking through 3 of them in our demo today, which we'll be going through private members only, private required login, private user attribute. We won't be walking through in the demo the public self-registration access setting today. Typically, this is recommended on a separate instance and one that is not configured for SSO. So the first is private members only. So only users with membership to a particular challenge or community can access the challenge and its content. Administrators can manually grant membership access. Membership is granted if new users are created within this challenge. So for this setting, you can add users manually, you can import users, or you could select users from the list who should be able to have access. The next is private required login. This is probably, I would say, our most popular setting, or one setting that most of my customers use most often. All users within the instance that are enabled will have membership and access to this challenge and the content. Users must authenticate with the instance first. So this may be done via SSO, or this may be done via a login. So maybe a user login page if you're not using SSO. Membership is automatically granted if new users are created from within this challenge. So this is both, again, adding users manually or importing users. Next is private user attribute. So only users with membership can access this challenge and its content. Administrators are the ones that will be deciding which user attributes will be used when granting membership. And Spigot will update the access based on attribute changes. And last, we have public self-registration. So with this public access setting, users all have access to the challenge, and this is done once users create a profile and then log in, and this must be done before they can post any content. Like I mentioned previously, we recommend this is done on a separate instance, one without SSO. Okay, moving on. So what does access mean? So can the user access the Challenger community? What ideas can users view when aggregating ideas on communities? And what challenges and activity stream content can users see when they're on the home community? And I see we have a question. So private members only versus private user attribute. So my best example would probably be, and I'll actually go back to that slide. So I would use private members only if I, say, for example, have a small user group in the challenge, say 20 users, and I have those list of users and I can easily import them and manage that list. Versus private user attribute, maybe I don't have the list of users that should have access to the challenge, but say, for example, I know everybody in IT should have access to a challenge. Maybe I'm running a specific challenge for that team. If they have that user attribute within their profile, it may be just easier for me to set up a private user attribute access setting for that challenge if I know that they all have that attribute, as opposed to trying to compile a list of users to import or manually granting each individual access to the challenge. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question. All right, moving forward. So what we see here is just a screenshot on the right, and this is typically what a user would see if they were denied access to a challenge. This is, for example, if it's a private members only type of challenge, you wouldn't see this if it was private required login, for example. This is a screenshot of the View Ideas page. And right here, we're just indicating what ideas users can see when they're viewing, when they have access to a challenge. So in this case, they have access to this particular challenge and they can view all of the ideas within this challenge. And lastly, this is a screenshot of the activity stream page. This is just an example of what challenges and activity stream content users can see when they're on that homepage, community homepage. So now we'll be discussing access via SSO authentication. So in this example, users can navigate to any community or challenge on the instance via URL. What will happen next is that your company will authenticate their credentials. So once it's sent over and it's confirmed, then we'll pass them back to the original URL. Then Spigot will review the access settings for that challenge or community, and it will either allow or block access to that user. Next is direct Spigot authentication. So in this example, the user will navigate to any community or challenge on the instance that is not configured for SSO. They will be prompted to enter in their Spigot username and password, which is stored within the instance. And if it is correct, then it will send them to the original URL that they intended to reach. Spigot will then review their community or challenge access and will then allow or block the user. Setup settings. So we'll walk through this in the demo, but this is how you can indicate the settings for a particular challenge or community access. So this is done through the administration panel. Under general settings, you'll see setup settings. To change how access is granted, you will select from the dropdown the access setting that you'd like for that challenge. So whether it's private members only, which is your specific list or individual access to a challenge or community. Private required login, again, which is granting access to all users that are enabled on the instance. And last, private user attribute, which is you indicating which attribute will be used for users to be granted access to the challenge. So let's walk through some scenarios. The first, again, is private members only. So in this scenario, we do not have SSO enabled. We'd like to invite 20 people to an extremely sensitive challenge. So maybe this is like a CEO challenge or something, a small group. How can I ensure that only these 20 people can have access to the challenge? So first, what I'll do is I'm going to change the access settings to private members only. So this is, again, making the distinction that only users that I want to have access to this challenge have access. Then I'll remove all existing membership. So that means I'm going to be removing any users that have access to that challenge currently. I'm going to remove everybody from that. You'll notice that super administrators will remain within that because super administrators have access anywhere within the instance. You'll select the individuals that need access to that challenge. So this can be done manually by selecting them from the user list. This can also be done via user import. And if the users do not already exist, then you can add them manually and then membership will be granted automatically. Okay, another scenario for private members only. So in this scenario, we have SSO enabled. Again, we want to invite 20 people to an extremely sensitive challenge. How can I ensure that only these 20 people can have access to the challenge? So what we'll do is we will set the challenge to private members only again. Bulk remove all existing membership. Select the individuals who need access using the search or advanced search feature. Or we can use the import user feature to bulk grant access to the challenge. Next, the scenario we have is private required login. In this scenario, we have SSO enabled. We want to invite 10,000 employees to a challenge. And if the other 10,000 employees access this challenge, that's completely fine. So in this case, all we have to do is set the challenge to private required login. Private user attribute. So in this scenario, we have SSO enabled. We would like to provide challenge access to all employees with the country attribute USA. What we'll do is we'll set the challenge access setting to private user attribute. We'll select the country attribute from the list. This is in a dropdown. And then we'll type in the attribute value USA and we'll preview the user list. So this gives us the ability to take a look and see at a glance, maybe before the challenge gets started, who has access to the challenge or who might have access. Then we'll click on update to set the access setting to private user attribute. Next, we'll be discussing adding and managing users. So here we see a screenshot of the add user functionality within a challenge. What this does is it allows you to manually add a user to the instance, and it automatically grants access to the current challenge that you are adding the user from. You'll notice that all the fields that are listed are required. So first name, last name, username, email address, and a password. Next, we'll be going over bulk user actions. So this is again a screenshot of the users page. You can remove and grant access in bulk via the actions page or subtab that you see listed here. So you can select the users that you'd like from the list. And in bulk, you can grant them access to a particular challenge or remove their access to a particular challenge. And I see I have a question here. So the question is, if you add a user to the challenge, does it give them access to other aspects of the site or only that challenge? So in this case, if we're adding a user to this challenge, I guess the best scenario that I'll use is required login. So if we're giving them access to a required login challenge, they will also have access to other required login challenges that are set in that way. If there are other maybe members only challenges, they will not have access to that unless you grant them access. If it's a user attribute, that user would need to have that attribute in order to grant that, get access to that other challenge. So in short, if you add a user to a challenge, you're adding them to the instance and the access settings for the other challenges or communities will apply. Let's see. Oh, yes. So if you want to remove a large number of users from a challenge, so say for example, on your instance, you have 7,000 users and you want to run a members only challenge to maybe a group of 400. What you need to do first is select all the users in the user list, remove their challenge access, and this may take some time. So I generally like to preview or once I go ahead and get the job started, I'll open up in a new window the users page, and I'll generally check and see how the process is going. So if I'm removing access, I'm going to just check and see like that I see the number of users that have access to that challenge is going down, because it can take some time if there are a large number of users in the database. So I would just confirm that you have everybody removed, and then you import everybody afterwards once you've confirmed that everybody is removed. All right, moving forward. Importing users. So you'll notice that importing users is in a separate section from setup settings or from the user management page, or from the user page, excuse me. This is going to be done through the administration panel. Under general settings, you'll see import users and ideas. You'll select the user radio button. Typically, just as a best practice, I always validate my list before importing just to make sure that everything looks correct and I don't have any errors when I'm trying to upload. So by importing users, what you're doing is you're adding them to that instance, and then it grants access to the current challenge that you're in. If you need additional information or help on user import, there is a link underneath the Choose File button, which leads you to the Support Center article on importing users. Managing roles. So we can create and assign roles to users. We can create both custom roles, and we can also add users to moderator and expert roles. You'll see that in the latest release, you won't see these same icons, but moderators, experts, and roles are all found under user management. So custom roles allow you to give special permissions and access rights to users with those roles. You can create the custom roles and you can assign them within the user panel for an individual or multiple users. Moderator and expert roles. This allows you to automate tasks based on categories. So if you have your categories set up for a challenge and you have moderators assigned to those categories, that's just an easy way for you to automate some of the maybe expert review tasks, approval tasks, or other tasks that you have for those users. And again, this can be assigned under moderators or experts in the user management section of the administration panel. So admin versus super admin. So the admin role is community or challenge specific. So users can be an admin in one challenge in not another unless they're nominated or granted that role. An admin has full control over an entire challenge or community. They do have some, they are able to, they aren't, excuse me, they don't have as much access as say a super admin does. If they do need access to multiple challenges or communities, then you should make them a super admin. Because again, a super admin has control over the entire instance, not just one challenge or community. So super admin versus admin. Again, super admin is not community specific. Here's the little checkbox that you'll see here. This, because it is not community or challenge specific, regardless of where you are on the instance, if the user is a super admin, you'll see this checkbox marked. Whereas with the administrator role, the regular administrator role, you'll only see the box checked for challenges or communities that they're administrators for. So super admins can move to any challenge or community on the instance. Permissions do not apply. So if you are a super admin, you'll notice that you may see more things than obviously a regular end user, but also a regular administrator. A super administrator can assign admin and super admin privileges. They can create and clone communities, and they can manage the language settings. So languages, you're going to find those. You can add custom languages within the root or main community. And so regular admins may not have the same ability within their individual challenge or community. Okay, so we'll leave some time for open discussion. If you all have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A section. We'll give us some time and then we're gonna walk into the or move into the demo. We will make the slides available and we'll have the recording available as well on the support site. We do have a page for the office hours, so you can actually review any of the past office hours and recordings as well. Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm just navigating over to our demo site, so please forgive me. I'm going to stop my share and then reshare the site. Okay, and can everybody see my screen okay? All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to walk through some of the items that we just went through today. So the first, I'm going to go through the user page and just point out a couple things. So first, I'm in my test challenge here. I'm going to go to administration and we'll take a look at the access settings or challenge access for this group of users in this challenge. So we'll notice here, this is my user list for this challenge. We'll see this is the challenge access column, which will indicate whether or not this user has access to this particular challenge. You'll notice some users are enabled. That just means that their account is okay to use on the instance. If the challenge access is set to no, that means that they do not have access to this particular challenge. So admins can specify which users have access to this challenge. One way I can grant an individual access is going to be manually through this add user button. So here I can include my username. So I'll use this as an example. I'll set a password for the user. Include a first name, last name, and an email address. And I'm going to make this user a super admin. Okay, so I've got confirmation that my user was successfully created. If I search for that user here within the search bar, I'm going to find the user that I just created listed here. They are enabled, so I've created that user here on the instance. Challenge access is set to yes. We can go into that user's profile and we can make edits. So whether that's managing whether or not they're a super admin or not, please make sure to update if you made any changes. You can also disable user accounts, change their password, and here's where you can also grant roles to individuals. You'll notice that the moderator and expert roles are not listed here. This is in a separate section of the administration panel, which we'll go through. Next, I'm going to move over to setup settings. So here's where we can indicate the access settings for this particular challenge. Currently, it is set to private members only. If I wanted it to change it to say required login, I'll just select that access setting and click on update. We can confirm who has access to this challenge by going back to the user list. And I'll actually open this in a new tab just to show you. Everyone in this list should now have access to that challenge if they are enabled on the instance. So a quick way for me to check this, I typically go to Advanced, is a community member is true, and all my users have access, and I can confirm this via the user list. And that's correct. So only super admins can assign other super admins. Regular administrators will not see that option. Okay, so back to the access setting page. If, for example, I wanted to change this to user attribute, I'd select that. Country, I'd select this from my list with, I'd select that value from the dropdown. Is United States, so I'm going to take a check and preview this user list. So it looks like there are about 330 users that have this user attribute within their profile. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and click on Update. So I see a question here. Does the user get an email stating that they have been added to the challenge? So there is a setting within the import users and ideas feature where you can notify new users that they have been added. Typically, because I will manage this list ahead of the challenge launching, I usually do not notify new users. But by default, if you do not check this box, users will not know that they have been added to the challenge. Now, if they do have access to the challenge and you've not hidden the challenge elsewhere, the challenge will be listed in the Open Challenges carousel or on the Site Challenges page. So there will be some indication that they have access that challenge tile will display. And does that help answer your question? Yes, incorrect. They will receive any challenge phase announcements if they are enabled. Those phase announcements will be managed under feature management and email templates. And like I mentioned earlier, you can import users to the challenge. You'll select the user radio button. Like I mentioned, I don't typically notify the new users. I'll validate the file. I'll choose the file that I'm using. Keep in mind you will need to use the 4 required attributes. So that's first name, last name, username, email address. There is a link to the Support Center article if you need assistance as well. And by importing users to a particular challenge, you're granting them access to that challenge. Okay, so I'm going to go through one other example and I'm going to set it back to members only. So first what I'll do is I'm going to change it to private members only. Next, what I'll do is I'm going to go to the user list and remove access for all users. So I'm going to select all the users within the instance, actions, and remove challenge access. And submit. We'll see that some changes are going to be made to the database. We'll click OK or yes to move forward. So this job is getting started and it's in progress. And if we try to navigate back to the user list page, say in a separate tab, we'll notice that we'll get a pop-up that there is a job running. So if we do any search results, they may not be completely accurate, but like I was mentioning, I kind of use this as a check to see who at this moment in time has access while I'm removing access to the challenge. So I'll just take a double check. Is a community member is true? We'll see that this user list is getting smaller and smaller. From the original, I think it was 852. So the job is still running. With large groups or with a large number of users that you'll be removing from the challenge, please keep in mind this will take some time. And so let's see, we've gone over user lists, adding users manually, removing access to challenges, importing users to grant access to challenges, and I'll go over last moderators and experts, and then regular, or excuse me, custom roles. So this is the section we're mentioning that you can, we went over briefly that you can add moderators to the challenge. The moderators and experts that you want to be giving a role to, they need to have access to the challenge before you do so. Otherwise, their username will not populate when you're typing it in. So just keep that in mind. Expert panel looks very similar. And again, the expert will need to have access to this challenger community before you try to add them to the expert panel because it will not populate otherwise. And last, we have roles. So here is where we can create custom roles. We can include a description. And any custom roles that we create will be listed here. So as an example, I'm going to add in a custom role. So my custom role is listed here. Once I've created my custom role, then I can apply that role to users. Looks like this job is still running. So we'll go into this user profile, for example. Here's one way we can give them that custom role is by selecting the role. We'll just want to click on Update to confirm. Another way is going to be through the Actions page. So if I selected a particular user or maybe a group of users, I can go to Actions, I can grant them that role, and that custom role will be displayed there. Okay, and oh, one last thing to mention, the public self-registration access setting will not be visible if you have an instance that is set up via SSO. So if you have SSO enabled, that public self-registration access setting will not be visible. And I see we have a question. So if I save a custom role and use the challenge as a template, will it be used in the next challenge I create with that template? And the answer is yes. So one thing to mention is that once you've created your challenge, you've created your custom roles, you just want to make sure that when you go to save your template, that you have saved it once you've already created that role or made any changes. The template is really only as up to date as once you save it. So if you make any changes to any challenges, even while you're going, just be sure to save your template and make any updates to it so that you're capturing all of those settings. Okay. And let's see, do I have any other questions? I believe I have answered them all, but all right, great. Well, that concludes today's user management office hours. Um, like I mentioned, this will be posted on the support site with a link to the video as well as the slides. So those will be available for you all. Thank you so much for your time today and have a great rest of your day.